The outcome of this confrontation remains in doubt, and today we have some experts who will try to shed light on this question about how this encounter will likely play out in the future. I want to remind everyone to fill out cards if you have any questions, and we'll have them sent up here. At the same time, if you're playing in the Twitter sphere, the hashtag for this event is GIF Conference DC. Very, very quickly, I want to introduce the members of this panel. Beginning on the far left, Usama Butt is the founder and executive director of the Institute for Islamic Strategic Affairs, which is a think tank based in the United Kingdom that looks at a host of strategic issues throughout the greater Arab Islamic world. Also joining us today is Mr. Nihad Awad, executive director and the co-founder of CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations. Dr. Abdulla Baabood is with us. He's a research associate at the University of Cambridge. Earlier, in fact, when I met Dr. Baabood, he was director of the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. Earlier, he was the director of the Gulf Research Center at the University of Cambridge. Andeas Krieg with us too, assistant professor for defense studies at King's College London. Leading expert on Iran here in Washington. Slavin, the director of the Future of Iran Initiative at the Atlantic Council. And as far as the order, I think I'd like to begin in left and come closer to me. Mr. Butt, if you could please open up with the supposed to be a 7-minute introduction. I think if it's 6 or 8 minutes, that's okay though. Yes, please.
Okay. Do you have PowerPoint?
Oh, we are still waiting on that. So actually, I'm sorry. We will actually come back to you once we have this slideshow working, which I understand will be in a few minutes. Please excuse me. Mr. Awad, we'd like to pass the floor to you. As you like, feel free to sit or stand up over here.
Good afternoon. My name is Nihad Awad. I'm the Executive Director of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. I'm happy and honored to be here with you today to talk about a subject I'm not an expert on. However, I have an interest in it. When I was invited to speak on the Gulf region and its politics, secularism versus political Islam caught my interest. The dichotomy, the controversy between political Islam and secularism in the Gulf region. But I think the conversation applies more, even beyond that. In particular, in the Gulf region, what goes on in those countries, political or economic strifes or tribulations or decisions affect our lives in the West, affect our lives in the United States. I take special interest in this conversation because I believe that what we are seeing in the news about the case of Jamal Khashoggi really signifies the issue of secularism versus political Islam and the impact of the imbalance, even in perception, about this, what appeared to be a conflict between the two. Jamal Khashoggi is a very dear and close friend of mine for the past 25 years. And I will give you the narrative of this conflict between secularism and Islam, how it has impacted the region and how it's impacting us. Earlier in the panel before us, the journalists who were talking about this thought that this story took much more time and attention than any other stories if it was another journalist. I disagree with them. I disagree with them because many journalists who have been killed in conflict, some of them may be targeted by political powers. But Jamal Khashoggi's case is unique because allegedly he was killed by his own government through premeditated, well-planned execution, gruesome execution style in a foreign country but on his own soil. Someone who had a global microphone, working for a major network in the United States, a newspaper, the Washington Post. But what's unique about Jamal in relation to our subject today is he's Muslim. Some of you call him Islamist, although I don't know what it means to be an Islamist. But also to other people, to Islamists, he was secularist, that he was not Islamic enough, and for the seculars, he was not secular enough. And he was from the Gulf region. Jamal Khashoggi was not fighting against Islamists and was not fighting against secularists. He could be the bridge between the two. But Jamal Khashoggi was fighting against authoritarianism and absolute power. This is what the region is suffering from. It's not suffering from Islamism or secularism. That is not the issue. The issue is absolute power, corruption, and the concentration of power in the hands of the few. The deprivation of free speech, lack of democracies, personal freedoms and choices, the lack of political parties, and the lack of participation in making decisions about the future of their own society. That is the conflict. The conflict is not between Islamism and secularism. It is a conflict with the authoritarianism and lack of freedoms, and that causes economic and political instability that affects not only the region, but all of us. However, if you zoom in closer at the Gulf region, there are absolute monarchies and there are modern monarchies that mix with democracies. For example, and I'm not going to name names, in one of those countries where you have absolute monarchy, people are deprived from making any decisions. The only free speech is the praise speech, is the speech that will praise the ruler. And if you do not praise enough the ruler, and if you are a prominent voice in your society, that might land you in jail like it happened a few months ago. One way to allow people to participate is in being consumers. Go to the mall, buy a new iPhone, go and spend time there in the mall. The consumerism is the political participation model that is presented to people. Don't worry about decision making. We're taking care of it, but if you worry about it, now we start worrying about you. So there is no free choice for people to participate. That is the absolute monarchy that we have. You have another monarchy that mixes monarchy with some democracy, and where there are free and fair elections, where there's like political rivals, two political rivals between different segments of the society, and they create parliaments and they fight in parliaments for the best future of their country. But they cannot change, for example, the ruler. That is a monarchy that is stable. And again, I'm not going to name names. These models are there. But what's missing is the coexistence between Islamism, again, I don't know what it means, and secularism. Both of them need to learn how to coexist. The reason I was asked to speak to you about this is to show the American Muslim expertise and experience in this. My interest is this, that we at CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, we are a Muslim organization. We are a proud Muslim organization that is also American organization that marries the Islamic values, Islamism if you like, and the democratic values that has built this country. In this model that we are living in the United States. The national organization, CARE, represents the entire Muslim community in terms of its diversity. Muslims who are immigrants and descendants of immigrants, including African Americans, people who come from all over the world. What combines them together is their Islamic faith and also being an American. We don't see any contradiction between us being Islamists or Muslims and being Americans secularists, because we all believe in the rule of law, we believe in equality, we believe that we have political choices and we are responsible for our political choices, and we also believe in the Constitution of the United States, and that binds us. What we have done so far over the past 25 years is we created this model that there is no conflict between Islam and democracy, whether that democracy is monarchy or Western democracy. Jamal Khashoggi, ladies and gentlemen, who lived in the United States, he was a global citizen. He was trying to educate people about Islamism and secularism in the region. He was the voice for the voiceless. He was defending both secularists and Islamists, those who wanted to have incremental minor change. Jamal Khashoggi never asked or called for the overthrow of the government. This minimalist request for democracy landed him in his fate. He wanted to be the voice for the voiceless. Today, you and I should be his voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Baabood, please ask you for your introduction, either sitting down or standing up as you like.
To save energy. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to be here again in DC. Thanks for the Gulf International Forum for the invitation. And thank you, Giorgio, for the introduction. I just wanted to start by saying that the topic itself is very interesting, the dichotomy between secularist and political Islam. And as if there was one, it is difficult to see or to say that there is a real dichotomy between Islam, political Islam, and secularism in the region, or if there is at least a secular regime that we can say this is a secular government in the Gulf. Religion is very much intertwined with political ideas, with social ideas, with cultural ideas, and it's very difficult to separate them. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi had said that those who thought that religion can be separated from politics understand neither religion nor politics. And I think that is something for us to remember, that religion is very important in many people's lives. And therefore it is difficult to say that this regime follows political ideology or political Islam ideology or the other. All of them, whether we accept there are secular regimes, actually have some kind of undernotes or some undertaking of political Islam. They've all used Islam to support the regime or to go against the regime. All the forces of the society have used religion to do so. And the reason that they have done that is because over the years all kinds of ideologies have been put down. Whether it's Arab nationalism, Nasserism, Baathism, Marxism, whatever ism that you want to call there, is being put down. And the regimes at that time in the region, not just in the Gulf, but beyond the Gulf as well, supported political Islam, supported the Brotherhood, and supported the Salafis and so on, because they were acting as an antidote towards all these different ideologies that were spreading against in the region. So now that those ideologies have gone, and there is no kind of ideology that brings people together, political Islam became the only galvanizing power to do so. And the governments actually have helped in doing this themselves by, first of all, stopping all kinds of ideologies and fighting them, and then giving and supporting political Islam or supporting Islamic schools, and giving room for them through the mosques, through the schools, through the media. So everywhere you go, everywhere you turn, you see religious slogans in front of you. So what do you expect from a young person coming up? He's been inundated, he's been indoctrinated with religion. Not saying that it's bad, but that's the culture of the region. And I think there is something that we have to remember here, is we should not try and impose our values on other cultures and other regions. That's how people want to live, and they like their religion and they appreciate it, and it's part and parcel of their ideology, of their culture, of their life and their future. So therefore, it is difficult to also, and it's wrong to say that this is good or that is bad. There is a bad guy, following political Islam, or that is a good guy because they actually are seculars. If we can even try and find ways to differentiate between them, because the differentiation is wrong. And in fact, this leads us to the question: so what has brought up political Islam to the forefront, if it is all part and parcel of the culture? Why are they now so active, and why are the regimes in the region are scared of them? Well, there are a lot of reasons for this. Some of them is relating to what has just been said, the lack of freedom, the autocratic nature of governments, the failed development policies over the many years, the misuse and the mismanagement of the oil resources, etc. And of course, also a lot of modernization and globalization and all of that. So political Islam becomes the core of the people that they can identify themselves with. And the governments actually, rightly or wrongly, have supported this, maybe inadvertently, without knowing, because they were trying to fight other ideologies. But also, those kind of policies that the governments have adopted have led to extremism and terrorism, because they have not opened up the space for people to participate and find room to express their opinions and to manage their own fate in their countries. Some countries have done that more than the others, but generally this is the case. So hence, people go to either extremism or find other outlets like follow terrorist organizations, etc. And it's difficult to just blame political Islam in doing so. I think it is also the culture and the political system that existed that closed the lid on the people, that people then have to find ways of expressing themselves, either through political means, legitimate political means, or illegitimate political means like being extremist and terrorist. Now, one challenge that is really challenging the region, and that's one group that we tend to talk about, because political Islam comes in different shades, in different colors, in different settings. So we have the Salafis, we have the, within that you have even different schools, we have the Shiites, and we have, in my own country we have also the Abadis, which is minority in the region, but very interesting and very moderate, if you like, sect of Islam. And then we also have the transnational religious movement like the Brotherhood. And I think what worries these governments now in the region is the Brotherhood itself, because it has this international or transnational linkages that start to challenge the governments. I don't think that the governments in the region are against political Islam, even if they pretend that they are against it now. I think they are against any form of movement that is going to challenge the status quo. And they are against democracy per se. And they want to, the regimes want to continue doing their, they want to continue the status quo, they want to continue the way they are, and they don't want any organized challenge from their own population. So if it wasn't the Brotherhood that's creating this challenge, if it was something else, they will still be against it. It just happened that because they closed the doors for everything else, for all other ideologies, only political Islam, that something that they could not control because it was difficult for them to control it. Because they first opened the door for it, and now the genie is out of the bottle, and it's very difficult to control, because how could you control people's religion and the space that you have allowed? So it is becoming a challenge for the government. And Giorgio, you're looking at me, do you want me to stop? I'm happy to stop here.
Thank you so much. Andreas, on this topic of secularism versus Islam, you please, continuing some of the points made by Dr. Baabood, shed some light on how this debate about authoritarianism versus liberalism has been derailed in the Gulf region as of late.
Sure. Thank you. Is it on?
Yep.
Yeah, it is on. Actually, you can't copy from me. You almost said everything I wanted to say. Thank you for being here. I've done a lot of research while I was living in the Gulf. I lived in the Gulf 5 years after the Arab Spring or during the Arab Spring. And I looked at the dichotomy between political Islam and the authoritarianisms, or the authoritarians in the region. And I think this is what the dichotomy is really supposed to be. The dichotomy is flawed when we look at secularism on one hand and political Islam on the other. Because it's really about authoritarianism and political Islam. Because political Islam in many ways is a response or the counterpole to authoritarianism. As Abdullah was saying, it was the response to failed states, failed authoritarian states that the West for a very long time have actually supported. Let me say a few words. I mean, secularism is very much a contested concept, and we're not going to get into details here, but secularism is inherently a Western concept. It's basically the separation of church and state, coming out of Enlightenment in the 18th century, in 18th century Europe and possibly United States, as a reaction to saying that the medieval socio-political setup between church and empire, church and state wasn't working, because the church or religion was considered to be backwards within the setting of Enlightenment. Most of the people in the Islamic world today don't share this. Most Muslims would not look at Islam as an obstacle to political progress or an obstacle to development in general. And I think that's very important to bear in mind here. Because Islam is inherently apolitical. Islam is very much compatible with many of the secular values that we cherish in the West. Because Islam as such is not telling you how to lead your government. There is very little in there on actually how to govern. And that's why it leaves actually a lot of room. Now, if we look at political Islam, the politicization of religion, or the religion, the use of religious symbols to achieve political ends, political Islam, and again, there are so many different definitions on this. If we look at Islamism, it's very much a response to failed states in the region. It has been since the 1920s, initially against colonialism, and then in Nasser time was basically the antidote to repressive authoritarians. And in different countries, these Islamist organizations have at times cooperated with the state, sometimes challenged the state. Islamism usually falls into three categories. So there is the harakat, which is the movement, which is very much civil societal. There's the Jamiat, the organization, and there's the Hizb, which is the party. These are all different levels of political Islam that exist in the Arab world. The key issue here, though, and as Abdullah said already, is that political Islam created for the first time a sort of public sphere, civil society within the Arab world, where people could, within the mosque or within the parameters of religion, could actually freely express their thoughts. And this was somewhat a breeding ground for different ideologies, different ideas of how to govern. And I think that is a very, very important point to be made. For an authoritarian, Islam itself, and definitely political Islam, is a challenge to regime security. What Islamists have tried to do, they've been trying to bridge a gap between, on one hand, deen, which is religion, and on the other hand is hukum, which is governance. And they said, we actually have the answer. We have an answer of how to govern. And Islam actually doesn't give you that answer. It's really up to the eye of the beholder in many ways. But what this is all about is, it's about civil societal activism for the most part, because civil societal activism is something that political Islam, this was a space within social politics in the Arab world that political Islam could fill, and thereby became a challenge to the authoritarians. So what we've seen since 9/11 is very much the politicization of that dichotomy between, liberalism, i.e., I don't even want to use the term liberalism, but it's the politicization of secularism versus political Islam. So the authoritarians of the Arab world have used this dichotomy to basically say, look, we're the good guys because we're secular. Do you really want the Islamists to come into power? This is what we've seen, particularly in Egypt. This is the discussion we're having in Libya, in Tunisia, in Syria. I mean, Assad is someone who himself said, do you want all these terrorists to actually run this country rather than me? And I do a lot of consultancy work for governments in the West, particularly in Europe. And many Europeans have bought into that narrative saying, we don't like Assad, but he's a lot better than all these Muslim brothers and the jihadists and the Salafists and so on and so forth. It was a very simplistic black and white narrative. And this narrative has been coined first and foremost by the United Arab Emirates. Mohammed bin Zayed's paranoia of looking at political Islam in general, and it's not the paranoia about political Islam, as I will tell you later on, it is actually a paranoia of the space that religion or political Islam gives to those who challenge for civil societal activism. It's the fear of civil society and the attempt to control the public sphere. The United Arab Emirates and their agenda across the region, not just in the UAE, but also in Egypt, in Libya, in Yemen, wherever they govern, they have really tried to impose their sort of control of civil society. And as Nihad said, the civil society that the UAE and later on also Mohammed bin Salman allow is the sort of civil societal activism that talks about education, talks about sports, talks about entertainment, bread and circuses. That's okay. But please don't talk about politics. The masjid, the mosque in many ways, is seen as a breeding ground because in the mosque you're allowed to speak freely. There's a sermon. Sometimes they have madrasas attached to it. So this could be a breeding ground of alternative visions, concepts, and ideas that again being seen as a threat or a challenge to regime security. And Mohammed bin Salman has really very much bought into that narrative. His clampdown against the ulama, the scholars, the clergy of the country, has not only something to do with reforming the country, it has actually a lot to do with clamping down on people who have followership, people who could potentially mobilize civil society, and the fear of that. And many of these people who've been thrown into prison, disappearing recently, some of them actually on death penalty. Many of these people have been labeled as terrorists because they basically advanced a view that was incompatible with the view that Riyadh wanted to advance. Now, I want to just quickly say something on the but, and this is, if you actually look at the policy of the UAE in Yemen and in Libya in particular, and that's something the State Department is looking into at the moment. I don't know if you've ever heard about the Madkhali school. The Madkhalis are a Salafist, very, very strongly a Salafist movement that is apolitical. We call them in many ways a quietist Salafist organization. They are very much Islamist, but they have absolutely no ambition to challenge current rule. So what the UAE have done, particularly in Libya, is they work with ultra extremist Salafist groups to fight against the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, but any kind of civil society in Libya. They run death squads, they operate for General Haftar, who is the UAE proxy man in Libya, and they basically go around killing people, and they're doing it in the name of Islam, but they're saying we're actually not political, we have nothing to do with political Islam because we accept the Lord of the land. We would never challenge Haftar as the political ruler. And this is the beauty of it for the UAE, because the UAE, they have not a problem with political Islam per se. They have a problem with people who can challenge authority structure. And the same is true if we look at Yemen. In Yemen, many of the tribal factions that the UAE are operating with are again of the Salafist kind, but the quietest Salafists who are not trying to challenge the authority of the UAE over the territory they control. Just one final word that Shadi Hamid said at one point for Brookings. You know, he said, if you look at the Arab world, those people who've done most damage are actually not the Islamists, it's the secularists. It's the authoritarian secularists, the Saddam Husseins, the Mubaraks, the Gaddafis, the Assads, and nowadays it's actually the MBSs and the MBZs of that region who've actually caused a lot more damage than political Islam. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Very, very interesting how you're suggesting that this debate between secularism and political Islam has really a lot to do sort of with the forces that are pro-status quo versus those which are anti-status quo. And talking about anti-status quo actors in the region, it's simply not possible to do so without some focus on Islamic Republic of Iran. Since the revolution of 1979, at least rhetorically speaking, the regime has talked about exporting the Iranian revolution to the greater Arab world. I would argue that perhaps with the exception of southern Lebanon, it's basically been a failure across the board. The revolution never got exported to Bahrain or Iraq, despite a lot of rhetoric from Tehran about that happening. I wanted to ask Slavin, why has the Iranian regime, in your opinion, failed to export the revolution to the region?
Big question. First, thank you to the Gulf International Forum for inviting me again to speak, and I enjoyed the comments of my co-panelists, and I hardly agree with much of what has been said, and especially about Jamal Khashoggi, who is a friend of mine as well. You know, it's fascinating. You're talking about quietist Salafists. Well, of course, in Shiism, you have a long tradition of quietism. Shiism is a uniquely democratic part of Islam in that people choose their own marja to follow, to emulate. So the idea of having a supreme leader who tells you what to do is really anti-Shia in many ways. And I mean, why hasn't Iran been able to spread its system? Its system is unique. I think first we look at the situation in Iran itself. Iran is the only country in the world where you have about 90% of the population that is Shia. In the Arab world, you have other countries, Bahrain, Iraq, Lebanon, where you have Shia majorities or pluralities, but it's not as high as 90%. So the notion of inflicting religious rule over an entire population in the Arab world, I think, would be very difficult for Shias. But you know, the other reason, of course, is that these other countries have had a chance to watch the Iranian experiment over the last 4 years, and most of them have not been thrilled by what they've seen. I listened to my co-panelists. I mean, what Iran has become, of course, is a country that talks about Islam, but it's really all about survival of the regime, survival of the elite as it has grown up since the revolution. And the religious part of it is really a veneer over the same phenomenon. I mean, Iran has more democratic characteristics than a lot of the Arab countries. Certainly has a parliament, it has factionalism, but you have a supreme leader on top. You have theocratic institutions on top that can interfere with the will of the people as expressed by their directly elected representatives. They have a parallel system of justice that arrests people, and of course the members of the government, people like Mohammed Javad Zarif, will tell you, well, we can't do anything about these environmentalists who've been jailed or these dual nationals who've been jailed because the judiciary is independent. Well, the head of the judiciary is appointed by the supreme leader. The head of the judiciary is an ayatollah. So it is a system that I think is really unique to Iran. I wanted to talk a little bit about the origin of the system, though. It's something called velayat-i-faqih, or rule by the jurisprudent. Where did this develop? The Arab world actually had a big role to play in this because the concept was developed by Ayatollah Khomeini in Najaf when he was in exile there from Iran, when Iran was under the Shah. And he took a lot from Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. extremely prominent cleric, the father, I believe, of Muqtada. Beginning in the 1950s, Mohammed Bakr al-Sadr and other senior clerics sought a way to make religion relevant and competitive with the popular leftist movements of the time, especially communism and Baathism, as well as Arab nationalism and Nasserism. So it was Sadr who helped found the first Shiite political party in the Middle East, Dawah, the Call, in the 1950s. And in 1959, Bakr al-Sadr published a treatise called Falsafatuna, Our Philosophy, which criticized communism from a religious perspective. He also wrote Iktisaduna, Our Economics, which combined aspects of socialism and capitalism in a way that Sadr thought would be more attractive to Shiites than the systems of East or West. And we saw this a lot in Iran also in the 1970s and during the revolution, where you had various lay philosophers, people like Ali Shariati, who tried to sort of meld socialism and Islam. This also had a big influence on what happened in Iran after the revolution. Sadr supported a greater political role for clerics, and as a result, he fell afoul of the Baathists, and Saddam Hussein arrested him repeatedly. He was finally executed in 1980 for his opposition to Saddam. So this was the environment in which Ayatollah Khomeini was coming up with his idea of Aliyat al-Faqih. And this contrasted with the quietism of Shia clerics, which had been traditional since Shiism broke off from Sunni Islam back at the beginning of the faith. Just a couple more points on this that I think are interesting. Even Khomeini was not looked to necessarily as a religious leader by many Shia. There were others. There were always competing clerics who were a source of emulation for Shia around the world. I had the opportunity to meet Sheikh Fadlallah, Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah in Lebanon, in Beirut, in 2008. And he had an enormous following, including among members of Hezbollah, which is, of course, an organization that Iran helped found in Lebanon after the revolution. And I asked Fadlallah about his relationship with Khomeini, and he said that they had developed a relationship when they both lived in Najaf. He said, we met several times, and Khomeini, had a lot of respect for me, Fadlallah said, suggesting that he was Khomeini's equal, if not his superior. So, we have characters like that. Now, of course, we have Ayatollah Sistani, still in Najaf. He's of Iranian heritage, but he's lived in Najaf for a very long time. He is a quietist. He has an influence over the Iraqi political scene, but he does not seek political power for himself or for other clerics. And I would argue that he is the most popular Shia cleric in the world still. We will see what happens after he passes from the scene. One other point I wanted to make, this was so fascinating, I read this on the Al-Monitor website last week. The grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini, Ali Khomeini, had been based in Qum, which is the theological center of Iran. He has moved now to Najaf. And this is fascinating. Some people think Ali Khomeini could be a supreme leader of Iran, possibly, in the future. Why has he moved to Najaf? Because he wants to get out from under the control of the clerics in Qum. And he feels that Najaf is a freer atmosphere for him now than Iran. So, many reasons, be happy to go into more why the Iranians have not been able to export their system. Obviously, they've expanded their influence, but they have not been able to produce a replica of their system anywhere else in the world.
Thank you so much. Yes, do we have any slideshow ready to go right now? PowerPoint presentation?
He's on it. He's on it.
He's on it.
Yes.
Okay. While we're waiting for that, I want to encourage some more questions. We've gotten some very good ones, and I want to ask one of these questions to our panelists right now. Since the 2011 uprisings, seen a lot of chaos in the region, but one country that's often described as a success, or at least a partial success, is Tunisia, where we have seen secular parties and the main Islamist party of the country share power in a way that is extremely peaceful compared to the state of affairs in some other countries, including neighboring Libya. I want to ask, what can we learn from this coexistence of secular and Islamist actors in Tunisia's political arena? This is a question for anyone who is interested in taking it on.
Well, I'll start. Tunisia is an outlying case in so many different ways. Most importantly, I think the big difference to Libya is that it hasn't seen the type of intervention that Libya has seen. The problem with the polarization of the political and socio-political arena in Libya was that you had so many different actors from outside intervening and still intervening today. You had on one side you have the Qataris, then later the Turks. On the other side you have the UAE and Egypt, and the Russians are trying to get in as well. And each of them obviously funding one type, one side of a polarized environment. In Tunisia, the environment was polarized as well, but it didn't see the kind of outside intervention, I think, which made a huge difference. And apart from that, Tunisia was it got onto the path of relative stability relatively quickly, plus the environment. Apart from that, we should highlight one thing about Tunisia, is that they have actually the highest number of people who went to ISIS, which is very weird, because actually Tunisia is one of the most secular countries, when we want to use that term secular. It's a country that has a long tradition of separation between church and not church, it's the wrong word, but religion and state. There weren't even bans on the headscarf and so on. But despite that fact, you had a reactionary movement, particularly in the south, particularly in the youth. People who were somewhat felt disenfranchised and then were attracted by these strong Salafist narratives. At the same, so you had these, on the fringes, you had these absolute radicals, but then in the center of the political spectrum, you did have the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated Ennahda movement. And the Ennahda movement is, if you look at the range from liberal Islamists towards, with ISIS on the other end of Islamism, I think Ennahda is very much on the liberal side of things. They were constructivists. They didn't have the same inferiority complex that, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood showcased in Egypt when they were in power. A lot of the mistakes that Morsi made in Egypt came out of decades and decades of repression and trying to insecurities as well, mistrust as well. I think in Tunisia this didn't really happen. The Ennahda movement was a lot more engaging, and it was also part of the process. And this is a key point when we talk about political Islam: is if you start to repress or coerce, you push these people into more extreme environments. And I think that's the worst thing when you want to deal with political Islam, is engagement, not repression or coercion. Because if you don't accommodate them and you don't engage them, you will create, it won't go away. It will actually create a bigger, more radical element that you then no longer can control.
I would just say that also the secularists, after the fall of Ben Ali, the regime and the deep state and the opposition parties, the secular parties, were also very pragmatic at the time. They were very scared of what happened to Ben Ali and the regime, and they were really forthcoming open. And I said in context of SSR when I was working with the Tunisian government at the time, and there was real genuine sort of willingness. I think it took two. It was not just the Islamists, but it was also the secularists who were really forthcoming and sort of culminated in the constitution that we saw, which was quite remarkable. But things are not very good at this point, given the whole regional context.
And while you have the floor, I think we finally have the
Okay.
PowerPoint ready.
Sorry about the first, and thank you very much. I like to visualize things, and you will see my brilliant mind in a very catastrophic way. So do forgive me for being utterly stupid at times, but I'm trying to make a point. And it is very generic and often simplistic. Things are not. You've already discussed how different Islamism and secularism may be. So I don't know, shall I shout Allahu Akbar or shall I go next slide each time? Oh, yes. Well, so I'm going to come from without to within. You probably won't be able to see much, but I think part of what I want to demonstrate will come later. It was more for me to look at. If you're going to, we're talking about the future of the region, whether it's political Islam or Islamism, or whether it's secularism. And I beg to differ that it's neither. There's a lot of sheer geopolitical movement taking place in the region, which I will come to. To start, I'm going to start from without and go in, and then from within I'll go without, and I'll try to do all of this in 10 minutes. So best of luck to me. The world where we are now, it's important to remember where we are. Then I'll sort of go into the Middle East. The world is like an ecosystem where the states are fighting the states, the states are fighting the non-states, the corporations are fighting the states, or in fight with the states, and the states are in fight and competition with people, and then everyone at the same time is a competition with the habitat we live in, the environment, the climate. So this is like an ecosystem where constant fight, a war, battle is taking place. We are at war, there's no other way around it, on multiple things, yet we choose to live in peace times, both sides of the planet. The GCC and MENA region is simply marred by chaos, and I think that's the kind of word that will describe it most. And almost every state is on an existential crisis. The region itself is really in the precipice of something that's new. Next slide, please. Well, how did we get here as a world and as a region? In the world, we have a complete lack of vision. We haven't had anything constructive coming from the Western side, or even from the Chinese, the Russian side up until now. Since the post-Cold War, there's been nothing, no ideas. We pretended to live in peace times and focus on economy, whereas there was major shifts, seismic shifts taking place across the world. There's no strategic thinking. In CIA, you guys shut down the strategic thinking department ages ago. In European intelligence, we followed suit as well, and we focus more on petty stuff, which makes sense at the time, but yes, sort of counter-terrorism or a couple of more things. But there's nobody in the governmental level looking at the strategic stuff, what happens in 30 years, 20 years, as compared to China, Russia are. We are ruled by greed and power in the world. That's really sort of defines us. And there's really a lack of leadership. I mean, despite, I think we only have one leader in Europe, Merkel, who's also going through a loss. There is really no leadership, particularly in the West, and across the world, it's a really lack of leadership. On the regional side, you have how we got here. We got here by prioritizing regime security over human security. Everything was about regime security, and Abdulla and Andreas has touched upon this. We got here by inabilities to have any kind of vision, any kind of strategy, any kind of leadership, and any kind of strategic thinking. And there is a parallel to be drawn with the rest of the world. The region is not alone. And also we got here by foreign interventions, or you can call it geopolitics, which has played a huge detrimental role. Isms and their services and disservice in the region. So how do the isms have contributed to this in terms of in the MENA region? Well, secularism, the disservice the secularism has done, it's been failure to define, which you touched upon, Andreas, what secularism actually means. What does it mean in the region where the region was very much in line historiographically with religion. There is a complete lack of consideration on the part of seculars or elites to the importance of religion and spirituality, self-consciousness with huge egos on the part of secular elites. It's just us, we are right, and everyone else is wrong. I've heard some leaders and policymakers really swearing they use a very regimental word to the Islamists. The Islamists are not far behind. They fail to define what Islam is. What does it mean in a modern context? How is it a solution? Islam huwa al-hal. How is Islam a solution? Can you there is really no clear definition, and there are groups within groups, part of Embrace and Abdullah touched upon. And then there is also self-righteousness and ego. Again, please be clear, I'm not generalizing things. Of course, there are different kinds of things. But in my personal experience, just after the Arab Revolution, I worked with a couple of governments who were Islamists at the time. And I was really shocked by their behavior to not listen, because first of all, who are you? And you're not from our country, so what do you know? It's a complete lack of listening to others, whether it's somebody out of the region or internally listening to their own youth and so on. That's a failure to listen. The huge egos, complete, and I think it sort of develops over time. To the next services, I guess you can say secularism inspired at one point the Arab identity, the project led by Nasser, which kind of still lingers on somewhere in the shadow, although it's practically dead. It's gave some liberalization to some economy, which can be seen as a good thing, particularly from a Western point of view. On the Islamist side, they provided, as Abdullah and Andreas and Nihad, very astutely put, an alternative to the static and dogmatic system. There was kind of new, very social welfare-centric approach. So they built social capital. They focused a lot more on human security. People mattered to them, and people responded, and they gathered, and they grew more and more social capital. Next slide, please. And then there was a collision between the secularists and the Islamists. And it took form of, and in the foreign intervention, and it just happened the last few years. And by the way, just keeping in mind that secularism, Islamism, all the foreign powers, all lacked any clear projects or any, they had very short-term motives, particularly the foreign powers. But both isms, the Islamism and the secularism, completely became morally corrupt on its generic basis. Again, we're not just talking about a very particular country or talking about across the region. So those both went morally corrupt, and they collided head-on and brought this catastrophe that we are witnessing today. So I've given a very nice analogy. Very proud of the painting. It's not, I haven't done it, I just copied it, sorry. So that's where we are in the MENA region, a volcano analogy. Phase one is has been a building up of magma. The isms, geopolitics, foreign interventions, which I described before. Phase two was the earthquake, the Arab Spring, the revelation, whichever you want to call it, that really shook the region. And what we are now is the phase three, the ashes. The ashes of the earthquake that scattered across the region. And guess where it's next going to be? Phase 4 is really the eruption, probably. And that's what my beautiful mind, that's what I do for a living, ladies and gentlemen. So please don't try to understand it, but try to go through. That's geopolitics. I'm trying to, the green circle focuses on the region, whereas the blue is the US and the Europeans. The black is Chinese, and red is Russia. I will very quickly try to explain what I mean. So while all this is going on in the region, on the world, if we start from the right where the star is, China has been trying to take control of the 9-dash line strategic maneuvering. The US moves on to the Asia pivot, tries to counter it through enhancing PACOM. That creates a backlash with China. So China in the arrows shows goes towards Central Asia, tries to create opportunities in Central Asia, and arrow black arrows down showing is creating one Belt, one Road projects. The triangle is showing the three now bases China is already using: Somalia, Djibouti, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So while China does this, Russia gets scared. It starts moving towards Central Asia to control its own sources. And Russia is being pushed in circle by NATO with the blue arrow on the top is showing. Russia sort of tries to counter and comes out in terms of creating its own sphere in Ukraine, Georgia, and then in Syria, the red row showing there. And then there is Russia is also, taking a very assertive warfare inside Europe and in the States in terms of very. These are all hard geopolitical maneuvering, and that's to sort of describe the kind of world we are in. This is all happening right now. Can we move to the next slide? And if you put the volcano in the middle, you get the picture, right? So the point is, all of this is happening in the world, and in that world, the region is sitting on an eruption that is about to begin. So can I bring in the question of isms, political Islam or Islamism, and secularism? Both of the isms, by the way, morally corrupt, haven't done anything, most disservice than service. Where does it go from here? We're talking about the future of the region. And I very simply argue that it's going to be sheer geopolitical maneuvering that's going to decide the region, not isms. Isms have done their service and disservice to the region so far. They will have an impact on some of the developments, but it's mostly sheer geopolitical maneuvering that will determine the future of the region. We will have economic forces, you will have brute hard forces, you will have climate change, you will have the Russian intervention going further, you will have the very hard power maneuvering by the Saudi, Israeli-American alliance, you will have the counter movements from the Iranians, and all of this isms will be used, but they will not be the determining factor in the years to come and the decades to come. It will be the sheer geopolitical maneuvering. Thank you.
Question for any members of our panel. At this point, about more than 5 years after the coup in Egypt that brought down the Muslim Brotherhood government, how do you see the future of political Islam in Egypt? Question for anyone.
Islamists made a huge catastrophic mistake, and not just during their power, but straight afterwards as well. They failed to realize the importance of the deep state. First of all, they failed to realize that disconnecting with the very people who brought them to power was a completely bad idea. They did not connect with the 6th of April movement, they did not connect with the youth. And that's what I said was self-righteousness ego. It was simply an ego question. We know what we need to know. And also years of stigma being attached to them. So it's kind of victimized mentality. I think in terms of the future, what's happening in the geopolitics in the region, and given the very lack of any clear project in the region that is in any way remotely or shapely helpful to the Islamists. There's only one project in the region at the moment, that's the Saudi Arabian Israeli-American project for the region. There is no counter project. Qatar, Turkey are of course doing, but they are really much involved and embedded in their own programs on every front. So there is really no external help for the Islamists. There is very little inside charismatic kind of leadership. We hoped that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt would have morphed into something better, but instead it morphed into something worse. The radical, or ultra-radical wings started to emerge. And it's not surprised, that's what the Egyptian state kind of deserved with the heavy handing. So things are not looking good, given both the external and internal factors for the Egyptian Brotherhood, unless they reconvene outside of Egypt and bring some sort of, something more pragmatic into their outlook, like Erdogan did at one point when he formed a party, but that's not looking like it.
Please.
I'll take you back to Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi and I were working on a project that we will disclose hopefully soon, after this crisis about his fate will be clear. Dawn, Democracy for the Arab World now. It is an organization that will be monitoring the democratic or lack of democratic performance in the Arab world. and we're going to create a democracy index. The purpose of this will be to raise awareness about political reform, political awareness, and political participation without changing the nature of the region, but helping the region to catch up with Western democracies or with the rule of law. So it is not really about the Muslim Brotherhood, it is not about secularists, it is about the individual who lives in that region, who's been deprived from their right to speak out, the right for the press to be free, the separation of powers, equal rights for all people, a constitution that looks at all people equally and holding people in power accountable and allow for people to choose their own future by themselves. And the West has a big responsibility. Instead of completely aiding and abetting dictatorships there, we have to exercise our right and duty to help those in power to rise to their responsibility and respect their own people and also respect international laws. The case of Jamal Khashoggi, I conclude with that, is the tip of the iceberg. Jamal Khashoggi, as I said, his legacy should continue. He was not a revolutionary, he was just a person with a pen and with a tongue. They have silenced him, and we should not allow that to happen.
I'm going to do one more question from the audience, and then we'll have to ask panelists to do a 2-minute closing statement. Oftentimes in the West, when we talk about Islamists in the MENA region, we speak about the threats, the alleged threats that they pose to women and religious minorities. And one of the arguments made here in Washington is that the U.S. should be giving support to these secular regimes, even if they're authoritarian, in the interest of protecting the rights of women and religious minorities. Dr. Baabood, what do you think is a reasonable response to such an argument?
Protecting women, rights of women and minorities is in the heart of Islam. It's a religion that actually calls for that. It is, unfortunately, people who did not follow the tenets of religion or the principles of religion who went away and created other secular rulings and interpretation, or misinterpreted the religion in a way that it suits them. Religions everywhere, not only in Islam, but other religions have been misinterpreted in different ways, in different settings, and we have seen sometimes disasters coming out of this. Religious wars everywhere was the norm. Now, the future is not to be tied up to the text. The texts are there to help us to see things. It came at a different environment, in different settings, and people have moved on. And it's how to use the values of the religion to enhance human activities and to enhance human future, and to try and to be contained within the old text and to say this is how we interpret the religion, or this is how the Quran has said, and be bounded by those kinds of interpretation. It's not going to move us any further. So I think the fear that minorities are going to be subjected to some kind of alienation within an Islamic or Muslim state is wrong. Because what is an Islamic state at the end of the day? It's not about whether it's an Islamic state or whether it's a secular state. What we have now is neither this or nor that. It's a hodgepodge of everything. It's a mixture of everything. What we face now is actually the failure of the post-colonial state. The post-colonial state has not been able to live to the expectation, whether it's ruled by religious tenets and religious teaching or secular. And there is no country in the Arab world, as it were, that actually hardly anyone, except Lebanon perhaps, that doesn't say that Islam is the main religion, and doesn't say that its constitution is based on Sharia and Islam. So they're all, at the end of the day, are Islamic states, and we can see that that minorities are protected. We can see that women are protected, but there are different countries and different interpretation that has not been able to do so. As we've seen in Saudi Arabia, that women freedom was curtailed for some time. We've seen an opening now in some aspects, but on the other hand, we have seen the opposite going on, imprisoning women who are asking for more freedom or asking for their right, which is contradictory to what the policy of the MBS at the moment. So I think it's a fear that doesn't exist. I think it's over exaggerated and trying to label Islam with giving it bad labels like that it doesn't really protect minorities or it doesn't protect women. I think it does. In my opinion.
Yes. I just want to add. There are so many different shades of Islamism around, and each of these different groups has a different interpretation of these particular norms. And I completely agree with Abdullah. I mean, if you look at the foundation, the good and the bad thing about Islam is that it leaves so much to the eye of the beholder and so much up to interpretation. So if you wanted to, and if you look at Saudi Arabia, I wouldn't say that it's the Wahhabist nature of the regime and the norms that have created problems for minorities and problems for women. It's tradition. And this is tradition across the Arab world. It's usually traditional norms that have been somewhat justified, legitimized through religious connotation. That people might believe, oh, it's actually Islamism that makes them do that, or it's Islam that makes them do that. It's tradition. And so even if in a secular country, I mean, if the UAE were trying to be a secular country, you still have some of these issues there that come out of the tradition, but they have nothing to do with Islam. So, it's not about, it is about choosing the right, or kind of grooming the right type of Islamism. And as I said before, there is a huge, I think in political Islam, there is a huge stage for people who are liberal, on the liberal end of the spectrum of Islamism. The problem is that if you don't engage with them and you try to push them to the fringes, this is when you bring the worst out of them. And then you get these kind of people like ISIS, Daesh, and so on, who claim to be Islamists and following Islam and being anti-minorities, anti-women, anti-everything that human, pretty much anti-human in many ways. So if you wanted to find something, you can always find something. But it is the engagement with the constructivist, with the constructive part of that spectrum that I think will bring the best out of it.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to start on the closing remarks right now, but before we do so, I just wanted to remind all of you to please return to the main room for closing remarks once we're done. Just because we started on the left, opening remarks, we'd start with you for a closing remark.
Sure. The best antidote to political Islam is an Islamic state. And in Iran, supposedly more than 90% of the population voted in favor of an Islamic republic after the 1979 revolution. If there were to be a referendum now, which I doubt there will be, I would imagine that maybe 20% of the population would want to continue with the current form of government. Iranians are among the most secular people in the Middle East. And you say this to people and they say, no, this can't be, ayatollahs, mullahs, etc. It is among the most secular societies in the Middle East. They are thoroughly sick of the type of government they have. They would like their elected institutions to be in charge, and they would like a wider choice of people from which to elect those leaders. So it's a great antidote, and unfortunately, it's very difficult to see how they're going to evolve from this system. I had some hopes, frankly, after the nuclear agreement was reached, that Iran would have the space for this kind of political evolution, but now they are under such extreme economic pressure from the Trump administration's resumption of sanctions that I fear it will nip this political evolution in the bud, and we will see more hardline elements, more authoritarian elements, be they secular or religious, military or clerical, who will really be taking the lead in Iran now instead of those who would prefer to see more secular and more democratic state.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure whether we should discuss how we're going to take the wind out of the sails of political Islam, but if that's what we wanted to do, I think political Islam thrives in an environment of greed, an environment of social injustice, repression, and so on. It's as simple as that. So if the state would become more successful in providing the public goods, providing for the needs of the people, providing social justice, a degree of pluralism, I'm not talking about democracy because I don't like the term and I don't think it's applicable to the particular context here. You don't need democracy for that. What you need is a bit of social political pluralism, social justice, and the kind of engagement between leaders and followers genuinely, that would basically take everything away that political Islam thrives on. And I think this is building institutions and states that are able to provide public goods to the people is probably the best, somewhat the silver bullet against political Islam. And political Islam is only going to live as long as states are failing to provide for the people.
I think there is a danger on polarizing the situation or polarization between us and them, Islamists and non-Islamists. The whole region has a religion, and a religion is Islam, whether in different shades and different colors and so on, and the diversity is even more beautiful. And there is so much vagueness in the whole concept that it's up to human interpretation how to interpret their religion and how they want to develop their lives based on the values and the principles of religion. So to try to do that, I think that is wrong. I think we should embrace all people from different backgrounds, from different religions, from different ideologies, give them space. As my colleagues have mentioned here, allow them to operate within the rules of the game, open the political space for them, create a modern state that is based on rule of law and political participation, able to deliver on the economic and social and cultural issues and create jobs and opportunities for the youth, create peaceful coexistence within and harmony within the states and within the region, which unfortunately the case is not at the moment. And what we need from our allies and neighbors is to actually help the states that want to do that and not support the states in the region that actually are creating problems. We have had enough of Cold War between the West and the East, and we don't want to create another conflict between the West and Islam. It's false. There is no conflict. It's only in the minds of people that want to create this conflict, and therefore, what we need from the United States, since we are here, is to actually see through all of this and to see that there are people there who have aspiration. They want to live. They want to develop. They want to have the same thing that you do have here. Of course, there are different settings, there are different environments, there are different cultures. We have to take that into consideration. But the basic principles are the same. We are all human beings with different belief systems, but again, the same thing, the core is there. And we should not try and divert the people's attention and create false expectation or false wars and false conflicts between us. We should find ways that we can bring people together from all different shades, different backgrounds, different kinds, to work together towards the better of the region, because what we don't want to see is that explosion in the region. It is very dangerous. What we are seeing now is extremely dangerous. Your religion is being used as a political tool. It's gone outside the real reason for why the religion was there in the first place. And if we do not control that, and if we do not support the right countries and the right leadership in the region, we're going to end up in real trouble. I think we have to end this. We have to stop and we find and say that look, this region deserves better than what it has now. And it's up to the United States, because the global power that actually can say that, no one else at the moment, despite the fact that the Chinese and the Russians and so on are trying to do the same. We've got to get over that. Even with Iran, why should we have a conflict with Iran? If we can talk to North Korea and create some kind of a dialogue, why can't we have a dialogue with Iran? Is it because it is Shia, or is it because anti-Israel? There are lots of other ways that we can talk to them and engage them, and you can only have security and stability in the region if all the countries of the region are actually participating in this, and if there is a common future for all of them. If you create enemies, you will perpetuate the situation, and you perpetuate enmity, and you perpetuate conflict, and that is what is needed. I think we've had enough of this, and I think it's time to move on. I stop here.
I have to go teach a class.
My final comment on this is, I believe as a Muslim, as an active in political work, I see Islam in secularism, and I see secularism in Islam. There are secular values of Islam where it allows people to be who they are, and allow participation and coexistence, respect and rule of law, and accountability. But also, there's Islam and secularism. Those who aspire for political freedoms and independence and separation of powers, that is also part of Islam. My concern is to use a label to silence the other voices. Today, what you have in the region is that dictators manage to divide and conquer secularists and Islamists based on their lack of understanding of who they are and what they want to do in their lives. And a good example for this is what happened in Egypt. After the coup against Morsi, regardless of his mistakes, they fought against the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamist party, but 5 years later, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is fighting those who helped him in the coup. He's fighting and private secularists and even military figures who helped him. So divide and conquer is the situation that we have right now. So finally, I should say that let's not allow dictators get away with their oppression. As we always say, don't let some people get away with murder. It is murder and oppression. Let's not allow them to divide people, social, political, legitimate forces in their society so that they stay in power, and to exploit the ignorance and materialistic and selfish interests of the West to continue and perpetuate this oppression over there by using the boogeyman, by the secularists against Islamists, and maybe in the future using the boogeyman of the Islamists, or So one after the other, they will be used. It's just a matter of time. And we have to hold our politicians in the West to account, to really promote the values of democracy and respect of the law like we do for ourselves here. The region deserves what we like for ourselves, but we should not allow dictators to get away with murder and oppression just because it is convenient for us in the West.
We in Europe fought 500 years religious war. In the Middle East, we just started about 100 years ago. Can you give us at least 4 more 100 years, please? Yeah, why not? It doesn't take, in terms of, historically speaking, transitions take time. The region is going through a lot, which I explained in internal and external issues. But I think in terms of the political Islam or secularism, I explained what I believe is the right argument that both isms are if not morally corrupt, at least, at best, lack a clear vision and project. They fail to do any proper service to the region. But it's also important to observe that when the West or Europe or US try to selectively aid and help seculars, it doesn't make them stronger, it makes them weaker. Because as soon as you, in my experience, start helping people in the region, whether we were talking about the women, for instance, it just makes the case morally weak in the region. So I think you need to give a little bit of breathing space. And finally, I would just ask you to move into for a thought. I posed this question to a lot of European policymakers in a closed conference. They're talking about creating a new European security structure. And my question was, the people, foresight generals and ministers alike, etc. That okay, fine. You're talking about creating security structures, etc. The European the security force of the project is going on. Can anyone tell me what is the idea of Europe? What is Europe? And I kid you not, the answer was nobody had an answer. The only person, a very strict politician, I won't say who gave the answer was what Europe is, what the rest of the world is not. And that sort of gives you a context. In the West, we like to believe that we have liberty, freedom of speech, and these are our values. But in Europe, we're really suffering. We are going from one, extent to another. We don't know who we are in Europe anymore, and I bet that it is probably this very same case here in US. You have now a very polarized society and very little vision. You don't know whether you want to be exilist, you don't know whether you want to be, interventionist, let's say. Interventionist is probably a strong word. Find out what you are, find out who you are, find out what's your vision, where you want to go. If you don't know where you want to go, don't tell us in the region. Because we already got 400 more years of war. Thanks.